Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Beyond the Myth workshop. This is one of those lectures which I think I was waiting and you all were waiting for. Guest lecture by Professor Rameshwar Bahuguna. Professor Bahuguna is a scholar with a remarkable academic journey which spans over 4 decades. And he taught at the Department of History and Culture at Jamia Millia Islamia, where he not only served as head of the department but also helped shape the Department of Tourism, Hospitality, and Heritage Studies, and led the Center for Distance and Online Education during critical years of digital transition that happened. His research delves deep into the religious and socio-cultural histories of pre-modern India, exploring how Bhakti and Sufi traditions interacted, how religious identities were formed in late pre-colonial India, and how tolerance and conflict evolved within India's spiritual landscape. His work on religious movements, 18th century India, and pre modern Himalayan kingdoms offer a very interesting pluralistic lens through which we can understand both the past and its enduring resonances today. From oral traditions to comparative religion, from the shared histories of the Mughals, Safavids, and the Ottomans to environmental history, Professor Bahuguna's teaching uh, journey reflects a commitment to bridging the local with the global and the textual with the lived. And today, Professor Bahuguna is going to delve into more of this idea of religion in medieval India and Sufism and Bhakti movement. This is a two-part lecture. This is today is the first part. I think Professor Bahuguna will speak for about 30 to 45 minutes. After that, we'll have a discussion with him. And then the next lecture will happen about 10 to 15 days after this. We'll announce the date soon, where we'll talk more about this theme of religion in medieval India. So, without further ado, thank you so much, Professor Bahuguna, for accepting the invitation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Ishan. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be part of this lecture series. Uh, can I have a larger picture of mine? I can't see myself actually. Or can I be seen?
I'll
Is the video clear?
Yes, I'll just see if you can see yourself.
Yeah, this is fine, I think. Is this okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, so I'm going to speak about uh, various developments in the field of religion in medieval times, and there'll be two lectures. The first part will be largely on Bhakti movement, and the second lecture subsequently, maybe after a week or so, will be on Islam and different kinds of Sufi movements. First of all, I would like to clarify as to what I mean by medieval in the context of Indian history. Different historians have used the term in different ways and for different periods, for different, different centuries. I mean, there was a time when the period starting from 13th century up to 18th century was regarded as medieval. Up to the death of Aurangzeb was regarded as medieval. But now, in the last 5 decades or so, historians have argued that periodization should not be merely based on the religious affiliation of the ruling elites. It should take into consideration the changes, the far-reaching changes that occurred in society, in economy, in culture and polity. So, taking that into account, it was then argued that medieval should start roughly from the post-Gupta period, roughly from 7th, 8th centuries, and it should go on till the beginning of the colonial conquest of India in the mid 18th century, after which then the modern period is supposed to have begun. So the period of almost 1,000 years from 7th century to the middle of the 18th century was taken as medieval, and the first 5 centuries of this period, 7th to 12th century, till the Turkish conquest of northern India in the beginning of the 13th century, was regarded as early medieval, and the subsequent 5 centuries as later medieval. So, by this scheme of periodization, both the Sultanate and the Mughal periods would be part of later medieval period. But then this arrangement has also been seriously questioned in recent times, and there are historians now, large number of historians, particularly in Western universities, who would regard Mughal period as part of what they call early modern. So basically, there is an attempt to bring the Mughal period in line with uh, uh, early modern history of the world. And Mughal Empire is now regarded as an early modern empire in the same way as, let us say, the Bourbon state in France, or the Ottoman state in Turkey, or the Safavid Empire in, in Iran, or the Habsburg Empire in Austria-Hungary. So Mughal Empire is now studied as part of early modern by many historians, though not all Indian historians have yet accepted this scheme. But that is another theme. So maybe um, later on, at some point of time, we'll discuss how history is periodized and what is the politics of periodization. Today, I'll confine myself to the period, let us say, between 12th, 13th century and the 17th century. To me, these 5 centuries are important. So whether you use the term medieval for these centuries or not, these are the centuries that I'm going to take up for my analysis of religious developments. Now, India, of course, would include India of the pre-partition period, which would include the whole of Bengal, not just Indian part of Bengal, but also Pakistan. That is what I mean by India, South Asia or Indian subcontinent. Now, my first point is that when you study religion, you have to move away from the kind of modern standards of modern ways of looking at religion. You have to treat past as some kind of an alien land where people behaved in a way fundamentally different from how they behave today. So sometimes there's a tendency to reduce the past to the familiar terrain of the present. My argument is that religion functioned in a way very different from how it does today. The role of religion in medieval society was very different. Moreover, religious identities were also substantially different from how they have shaped today. I'm going to argue that modern religious identities that we have in our country, be they Hindus or Muslims uh, or Sikhs, uh, have evolved out of certain developments that took place in the medieval past, in those 5 centuries that I'm talking about. But uh, in their formation, many other factors have also played a role, particularly colonialism and what we call colonial modernity. So please be careful when we use the term, when we should be very careful when we use the term Hindu or Muslim, in the case of the pre-modern past. Uh, Now, usually there has been a tendency among historians to uh, to speak of two religions in medieval India. There is a kind of two religion model of medieval India. If you look at uh, the conventional textbooks, and uh, if you look at the works written by the earlier generations of historians in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, or 50s, there was a tendency to look at the religious composition of the population in terms of Hindus and Muslims. It was readily believed that majority of the people of the medieval period from 13th century onwards were Hindus, that the Hindus were the dominant majority all through in ancient times also. Most of the people of ancient India were Hindus. Most of the people of medieval India were also Hindus. But then from 7th, 8th centuries onwards, and particularly from the 13th century, a new religious group entered the Indian subcontinent, the Muslims. And therefore, uh, um, uh, therefore, there were two dominant religions in those times, the Hindus and the Muslims. If you look at, for instance, the important work of Tarachand, Influence of Islam on India, he would speak of these two religions, that uh, most of the people are Hindus and those who are not Hindus were Muslims. So, and that Muslims initially came from outside, though in course of time, large number of Indians also became Muslim. So this is the two religion model. What I'm going to tell you is that it is not so. One would not be able to understand how actually uh, one will not be able to understand the nature of religious developments in those centuries if one only talked about these two groups and did not consider the enormous diversity of religions uh, in that period. Uh, it's not just two religions, but it's a multiplicity of religions that characterized the pre-modern society of India. Today, it may be difficult to accept this proposition because today we have most people in India whose religious identities are defined in terms of their being Hindu or Muslim or Christians or Sikhs. But in medieval times, these identities were not all embracing identities. These identities did not cover the entire length and breadth of India. They did not even cover all social groups. In fact, I would argue that majority of the people in pre-modern times were outside the scope of uh, these overarching identities, Hindu or Muslim. Today, most of the people would be covered by them, but it is not so in the case of pre-modern times. Today, you ask anybody about his or her religion, prompt would come the answer. Uh, in terms of the person being a Hindu or a Muslim or a Sikh or a Christian. Um, but it was not that it was not so in medieval times. It was not so even in the period that is now called early modern, 17th, 16th, and 17th centuries. In fact, right up to the end of the 18th century, uh, uh, it would be very difficult for people to uh, be identified either this or that. Uh, in fact, that was a problem that early census administrators faced in the late 19th century. It was very difficult for census administrators and for census, for those who were collecting information for the census to find out the religion of majority of the people, particularly when it came to the lower sections of the society. And that is what, for instance, becomes very clear when you read Ibbetson's Punjab Gazetteer or Punjab Census Report, where identities were identities did work at the upper level of the society among the Brahmins and the Rajputs and the Pathans and the Sayyids and Sheikhs. But when they went to the villages and spoke to the peasants and the artisans and the people belonging to various subordinate castes, uh, they did not get clear-cut answers about their religious affiliation. So this point has to be understood uh, how the colonial modes of information, knowledge production, colonial administration played important role in widening the scope of existing religious identities. Moreover, you should know that the British our colonial rulers were very fond of classifying people. They had introduced these models from the West, and in the West, these models became popular in the post-Enlightenment phase, and they brought all those categories of analysis to India and classified people in terms of caste and religion. So one should be very clear that in medieval times, um, these categories, the categories of Hindu and Muslim, did not function the way they do today. Even Muslim. I mean, I would say that it is true not only of the Hindus, it is also true of the Muslims. Because, I mean, for instance, uh, if you read Kabir's verses, for instance, if you read Kabir's poems, Kabir, I mean, nowhere does he call himself a Muslim, although he was, I mean, modern historians would say he was born in a Muslim family. Um, and because his name Kabir is a Muslim, is an Arabic name for God, therefore he is easily placed in the category of a Muslim by modern scholars like Vaudeville. But Kabir clearly um, stood outside both Hindus and Muslims and was very clear that he was neither of them. He was neither a Hindu nor a Muslim. Um, in fact, he identified these categories of Hindu and Muslim with ruling elites. So you will find that Kabir, uh, the word Brahmin is synonymous with the word Hindu or Pandit. Similarly, the word Turk in Kabir's poetry is synonymous with the word Musalman. So these were elite categories. Another point that I wanted to make clear to you is that the word Hindu, as some of you would be knowing, uh, was not produced in India. This is not a term of Indian origin. The word Hindu, it was given to us by the Persians and then Arabs later on. In fact, now for a long time it was believed that Al-Baruni was the first scholar. Some of you may have heard of Al-Baruni. He was a late 10th, early 11th century, Arab-speaking scholar who had come to India in the wake of Mahmud of Ghazni's invasion in the late 10th and early 11th century. And he wrote that great work, Kitabul Hind, which was translated in the late 19th century by Sachau, and it came to be called Al-Baruni's India. Some of you may have read about this book, Al-Baruni's India, which was translated by Sachau in the late 19th century. Now, scholars are pointing out that Al-Baruni has nowhere used the word Hindu in his work. The word he exactly used was inhabitants of Al-Hind, inhabitants of Hind, people of Hind, not Hindu. It is only from 13th century onwards, once the Turks established the rule in India, once they became the rulers of northern India in the beginning of the 13th century, that their official chroniclers, their official historians started using the word Hindu in a religious sense for those people who are not, in their view, Muslims. So one should be very clear that the word Hindu was given by Muslims. The religious connotation of Hindu first came from the Muslims. And for a very long time earlier, the Iranians had used the word Hindu in an ethnic sense, in a geographical sense, for all people living in India, people who lived on the other side of the river Indus. Now, but the more important question is, when did the Hindus themselves adopt this identity name for themselves? When did they start calling themselves Hindu? In other words, when did the term Hindu acquire a self-descriptive character? When did the people who were called Hindu by Muslims start looking upon themselves as Hindu? And as many historians, including Romila Thapar and Professor Irfan Habib, have argued that it happened only roughly from 15th century onwards. That some sections of the Hindu society started using the word Hindu for themselves, following the Muslim example, accepting the Muslim nomenclature for them. So, but by the end of the pre-colonial period, by the end of the 18th century, how many groups of Indian society were looking upon themselves or designating themselves Hindu is a moot point. Though the identity was expanding, the Hindu identity was expanding over a period of time, and it is possible that gradually large number of people came to call themselves Hindu, yet majority of the people remained outside this description. Now, it is only in modern times that it became possible to in a way, adopt the model of world religions to Indian people. That Hinduism became a kind of world religion. Islam was already a world religion. Hinduism also came to be looked upon as a world religion, and large number of people in the census came to be recorded as Hindu. Those who are not Muslims. But then that happened to the Muslims also, as I'll tell you later in the second lecture. Large number of Bengali Muslims, for instance, came to be placed in the category of Muslims only by the late 18th, early 19th century. In fact, in the early 19th century, there were reforms. There were Muslim reformers who were trying to reform the Bengali Muslim society by telling the people to behave in a proper Muslim way, to keep Muslim names, or uh, to follow the correct Islamic rituals, which means they were not doing so earlier, which means that that many of the Bengali peasants and artisans uh, did not look upon themselves as Muslims for a very, very long time. So the process of identity formation is a long drawn process, stretching right into the colonial period. So we should not, my argument is this, that this is the first point that I'm making today in this lecture, that when you are studying religion in the context of medieval India, you should not uh, think of the existence of fixed religious identities that are fixed, all embracing and universal. No, there was no such thing. It could not have been. So what was happening was that there were all kinds of religious groups who did not look upon themselves as Hindu or Muslim. Even in the case of Sikh history, till the 19th century, the identity remained quite fluid, as many historians have shown. Um, so, uh, this is the first point that I'm trying to make, because this would then enable us to understand the the creativity of religious life in medieval India. Because there is a tendency to study all religious developments in medieval India either as part of Hindu history or Muslim history. The entire history of the Bhakti movement is seen as the history of Hinduism. The entire history of Sufi movement is seen as the history of Islam in India. When I used to do post-graduation in JNU many, many decades ago, Professor Muzaffar Alam used to teach us a course called Religion and Society in Medieval India. And the course was divided into two parts. One part was on Islam, which included Sufism and ulema. Another part was on Hinduism, which included mostly the Bhakti movement. As if there was no common meeting ground, as if the categories were so well knit and demarcated. But if you really look at religious life in medieval India, you would find it you'll find it much more complex than this. And one example that I'll give you two examples. One example is from a text called Dabistane Mazahib, which was written in the middle of the 17th century by a person called Mobat or Mobit. Maybe he was originally a Zoroastrian who had superficially become a Muslim. So this book, Dabistane Mazahib, is a kind of, uh, is a kind of uh, study of all religions of the world and comparing them with each other. A large section is devoted to the study of what he call Hindu systems of religion. He does not call it Hinduism. That is a wrong translation, again by the English translator. It is Hindu systems, which means it is not one system but many systems. So what does he study there? He studies Vaishnavas, he studies Vairagis, Shaktas, uh, uh, Nathpanthi yogis. So the reality of his time was great multiplicity of religions. There were Shaktas, there were Vaishnavas, there were Nathpanthis, there were Vaishnavas, there were followers of the sons, various sons like Kabir and Dadu, and there were followers of Jainism, few followers of Buddhism. Again, when he discusses uh, Sufi silsilas or Sufis of various hues, he clearly talks about different kinds of Sufis. So sometimes Sufi silsilas were also called as if they were Sufi silsilas uh, were studied as if they were different religions, different schools of thought. So one has to understand that that at the bottom of the society, there were different ways in which religion worked. And they looked upon themselves more as Vaishnavas or Saivas or Shaktas or you see, although there were Muslim scholars and Muslim observers of that time who called all of them Hindu. For instance, Babar would say in his autobiography, in his memoir, that people of India are Hindus. But even though the Muslim scholars, Muslim court historians would call the people Hindu, the question is how many of these Hindus looked upon themselves as Hindu? That is also important. Moreover, the category remained by and large a kind of vacuous category, empty category. Only a part of it was filled by people who called themselves Hindu. So the Rajputs or the upper caste definitely would have internalized the use of the term, but not everybody. Now, once you accept this multiple character of religious life in pre-colonial period, you would then be able to appreciate the true character of the religious developments in medieval India. What we call Bhakti movement was not one movement. There were many different ways of different kinds of socio-religious movements which have been put together by modern scholars as Bhakti movement. And it is usually believed that Bhakti was born in South India in the 8th, 9th centuries in the form of Alwars and Nainars. Then it passed through Karnataka in the form of Bir Seva movement, and finally came to North India, where it gave birth to two different kinds of movements: the Saguni Vaishnava movement and the Nirguni monotheistic movement associated with Kabir and Nanak. So, but this whole myth that Bhakti came from the south, this whole idea that Bhakti came from south to the north is a 16th or 17th century innovation, as for instance a very famous historian Hawley has pointed out in his work, that this all India image of Bhakti movement was created in the Bhakti traveling from south to the north was created in the 16th, 17th centuries when a new text was added to the Bhagavad Purana. The new text was Bhagavad Mahatmya, in which Bhakti is portrayed as a woman traveling from south to the north with her two children, Gyan and Tap. And then finally, she reaches Vrindavan, which is the main center of Bhakti, Vaishnava Bhakti in the north. Now, um, you know, since uh, we have very little time at our disposal, I'll take 5 or 10 minutes more. It is important to know that Vaishnava Bhakti, the golden period of Vaishnava Bhakti coincides with the Mughal period, whereas the Santik Bhakti, which was more associated with the uh, lower caste religious figures like Kabir, Dadu, and others, uh, uh, happened much earlier. I mean, roughly, we can say roughly from the 15th century, we first see the uh, growth of what we call lower caste bhakti or nirguni bhakti, or strongly monotheistic bhakti, where the idea of incarnation of God is rejected, idol worship is rejected, caste hierarchies are also denounced. This is the bhakti associated with Kabir. Kabir is late 15th, early 16th. Guru Nanak, late 15th, early 16th, 1469 to 1539, Guru Nanak's period. Ravidas, the great saint from Banaras, was also a contemporary, maybe a junior contemporary of Kabir. But they both lived in the same city of Kashi or Banaras. You have many of their autobiographical verses where it becomes very clear that they both lived most of their life in Kashi. Then you have many others. Namdev is much earlier, came from Maharashtra, but may have traveled to north to various places. Equally popular both in Maharashtra as well as north. He was a calico printer. Dadu, later on, a contemporary of Akbar, was a cotton carder. Since we have little time, this is the bhakti that emerged from these lower classes who were mostly from artisanal background. And uh, this could have been in some way related to the aftermath of the Turkish conquest, when trade and commerce grew, urban centers came up, large number of artisanal groups grew in the cities, and in the case of Sikhism, it is the Jat peasants were attracted to Sikhism. Jat peasants were attracted to Sufism also, but that is a theme I shall take up later, because in Punjab, substantial population of Jats was attracted to Sufism also, as Richard Maxwell Eaton has shown. And in another part of Punjab, you have Jats being drawn into the framework of Sikhism in the long run. Most of the Jat population in the late 17th century was that of the Jats, though the gurus, the Sikh gurus, were from the mercantile background. Later on, I'll tell you, in the case of Rajasthan, many Jats were attracted to Bishnoi religion, and still later in Western UP, in the Mathura Agra region, they became followers of Vaishnavism. Those who were left became Arya Samajis later on. Maybe the process of Hinduization among many of these groups is still going on. And maybe Islamization also in the case of certain tribes in Pakistani part of Punjab. So you should consider my proposition that religion is a very dynamic phenomenon. It is a process. It is not something given. It is not something that happened in remote ancient times and remained the same in a fixed state. Another group that developed during the Sultanate period was that of Nathpanthi yogis. Yogis are ubiquitous, everywhere yogis are seen. Kanpata yogis, they are everywhere. It is important to note that the Nathpanthi order became very popular in northern India in the 13th, 14th centuries, precisely at the time when Turkish conquest was being consolidated, and Turkish rule had been established. And since Turkish rule in the beginning in the beginning, not later. In the beginning, gave a kind of setback to the close alliance between Rajputs and the Brahmins, and the Rajput Brahmin alliance uh, was broken for some time. That gave a chance to many non-Brahminical groups from the bottom to come up, and Nathpanthis in the beginning were that group. Later on, the same role was played by sons. Still later, Vaishnava Bhakti also developed, and in the growth of Vaishnava Bhakti, there were many factors responsible for this. Of course, growth of Bhakti in South India was important because many of great Vaishnava Bhakti acharyas initially came from the south. Ramanujacharya and later on Nimbark uh, and Madhavacharya, they all belong to the south. And late in the north also, when Vaishnava Bhakti developed, there was a tendency to link the North Indian Bhakti to the South Indian Bhakti acharyas. Um, but that is a separate issue. What is important is that uh, the growth of Bhakti in South, the growth of Bhakti in Bengal played very important role. In Maharashtra also, the Vaishnava Bhakti became very popular, so popular that the shrine of Krishna, Vitthal, at Pandharpur in southern Maharashtra became very popular. And it is this Pandharpur shrine which came to be associated with all leading Maharashtrian Bhakti saints like Namdev, Gyaneshwar, Eknath, and Tukaram, and also later on played important role in the rise of the Maratha movement. In the north, you have uh, uh, Vaishnava Bhakti of different kinds. You have Ram Bhakti as well as Krishna Bhakti. Ram Bhakti was popularized first by Ramanand. Ramanand is a shadowy figure. We do not know much about him. He belonged to the 15th century, late 14th, 15th century. Kabir is regarded as his disciple, but many upper caste Vaishnava sons are also looked upon as his disciples. It is believed that he had 12 disciples. One of them was Kabir. Ravidas is also seen as a disciple. So there were followers of Ramanand, the Ram Margis. Tulsidas came into that tradition of the famous author of the Ramcharitmanas. The Krishna Bhakti uh, was centered in Braj region, as you all know. Krishna Bhakti was divided into many groups. Chaitanya's followers, then who were based in Vrindavan. Gokul was the center of Pushti Marg, or the followers of Ballabhacharya. One important factor uh, on which I would like to conclude with which I would like to conclude this lecture was the connection between the growth of Mughal Empire, the growth of a very large centralized, stable Mughal Empire, and Vaishnava Bhakti, and even Santik Bhakti. In the it is the Mughal state, it is the Mughal Empire, uh, as a large political formation, which provided the basis for the expansion of both Santik Bhakti and Vaishnava Bhakti by creating a centralized political system, by enabling people to travel far and wide from south to the north, from one part of northern India to the other, which provided a kind of peace, Pax Mughalika. In fact, there's a direct connection between Mughal Empire and growth of Vaishnava Bhakti in the Braj region. Uh, Professor Habib's famous has recently brought out a new work 2 or 3 years ago, showing very close connection between the Mughal emperors and the growth of Vaishnava Bhakti. How the Mughals, issued land revenue grants to the Vaishnava establishments of the Braj region. How close relations existed between the Chaitanya and the Ballavite elites and the Mughal emperors in Akbar's time. How Akbar was internalized, how Akbar was incorporated into the Vaishnava hagiography as a as a patron, has been shown by many historians. So there is a very close connection uh, uh, between Mughal Empire and the growth of Vaishnava Bhakti. So much so that some historians even call it Mughal Bhakti. So on that note, I would like to conclude this lecture. I had many other things to say, but unfortunately for shortage of time, I cannot go into them. Maybe next time when I meet you for a subsequent lecture, I would be able to dwell upon some of them. Thank you very much. Now we have some time for discussion. If you have questions, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Professor Bahuguna. The floor is open for questions. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand and you can then unmute. I think Vidyaji has a question. Vidyaji, please unmute. And then I think after Vidyaji, we'll ask Mandiraji. Yes.
Thank you, Ishan, and thank you, Professor, for a wonderful lecture. And as you said, there is so much to cover. I'm sure we are really looking forward to the next one. My question was like, how much of influence Shankaracharya's movement at different phases had on the Bhakti movement? Like
Well,
when it started, yeah, and later on when the Mughal came as well, yeah.
You see, Shankaracharya's period is 9th century. Okay, there's no it's very difficult to exactly pinpointedly say he belonged to this period or that period, but roughly it is 9th, 10th century. Now, Shankaracharya is not associated with Bhakti movement. First of all, Ramanujacharya is. Shankaracharya's path is Advait. And the monist philosophy, directly Shankaracharya is not part of the Bhakti movement because he followed a path that we usually associate with Gyan Marg, the way of contemplation, meditation, the intellectual method. In Indian tradition, in the Brahmanical tradition, three different ways of salvation have been recommended. Karma Marg, that is the way of rituals. Gyan Marg, which was the way of Shankaracharya, and Bhakti Marg. The beginning of Bhakti Marg, if at all you want to trace it back to the earliest text, it can be traced back to Vedas, Upanishads, or Gita. But in terms of Bhakti acquiring a social character and intellectual character, I think you can trace it back to Ramanujacharya, who responded to Shankaracharya's monism and who, instead of Advait, suggested was the progenitor of the Dvait philosophy, dualism. So the basis of Bhakti basically is that the individual soul and the supreme being are two separate things, and it is only through bhakti that the individual soul can become part of the supreme being. Whereas Shankaracharya's primary notion was that they are one, and those who believe that they are two are under an illusion, माया जिसको बोलते हैं. तो मेरा कहने का मतलब ये है कि in Shankaracharya is not part of Bhakti movement in that sense. Bhakti movement, of course, he is an integral part of Hinduism and Hindu philosophy and Hindu intellectual history. Bhakti proper would start with Ramanujacharya, the founder of Sri Vaishnavism. And but one interesting thing happened. I mean, that is why I consider your question important. When Bhakti developed in North India, Vaishnava Bhakti developed, there was a tendency to incorporate Shankaracharya into the Bhakti movement. And I give you one example of this. In the beginning of 17th century, the famous Ramanandi monk, Nabadas, composed Bhaktimal, which was basically a kind of directory of all kinds of devotees, both Puranic as well as historical. And he included the name of Shankaracharya as a devotee of Hari, as a bhakt. So there was a tendency to include Shankaracharya in the ranks of bhaktas. But if you look at it historically, I think Shankaracharya is not part of Bhakti movement in that sense.
Mandiradi?
Thank you for this most illuminating lecture. And it makes one think of the terrible struggles today's Hindutva is having to find these tight little compartments. But about the Bhakti movement, where does caste come in here?
Caste comes here in a big way.
Yeah.
As I also said that I would take back to my statement that Kabir's movement was primarily a lower caste movement, which clearly dissociated itself from the elite religions of the time, both Hindu as well as Islam. In fact, it would be wrong to argue that Kabir was trying to bring the Hindus and Muslims together. Today, we look at Kabir as a symbol of Hindu-Muslim unity, as some kind of a syncretic figure. But if you read his poetry carefully, he denounces both. He rejects both. And he says that his path is independent of both of them. Why? Because to them, both these groups were highly discriminatory. They were hierarchical. They created hierarchies, social hierarchies. The Turks were no less because among the Turks also there was a notion of high born and low born. You know, when Balban became the Sultan, one of the historians of that time, Ziauddin Barni, writes that Balban was a great believer in the blue blood of the Turks and considered Indian converts of low birth. Considered that Indian Muslims were not fit for any high position in the administration. And when Muhammad Tughlaq later on gives administrative positions to some of the converts, Barni is very critical. So Kabir was very clear in his mind, not just Kabir, but even other lower caste sons like Dadu, like Namdev, like Raidas, like Paltu, or Sen, Sadhana, they all were clear. Most of them belonged to the lowest of occupational castes of that time. Kabir was a Julaha, Raidas was a cobbler, Namdev was a calico printer, Dadu was a cotton carder, and Sadhana was a butcher, Sen was a barber, Dhanna was a petty Jat peasant. Nanak himself belonged to the lower business caste of Khatris at that time, which was not a Brahminical caste. So all these people basically, in the fact that all of them erupted at the same time, roughly in the same period, shows that it was a great movement of people that was taking concrete shape against a system, against a hierarchical system that was clearly sought to be protected by the rulers of the day, be they were Hindus or Muslim.
Sri Chaitanya himself was a Brahmin.
Yeah.
But he disregarded caste totally and therefore came into conflict with the elite, right?
You are right, absolutely. I mean, and that was true not only of Sri Chaitanya, that was also true to some extent of many other Vaishnava preachers, like, for instance, Eknath was a Brahmin, Gyaneshwar was a Brahmin, the many workery saints of Brahmins, but they rejected caste system. They absolutely denounced caste hierarchies, and for this reason, some of them were boycotted by people of their own caste. Like, for instance, Ganeshwar was ostracized. Sant Ganeshwar was ostracized. I, I, when I was a child, I saw that movie on Sant Ganeshwar, and it made me cry. I still remember I had cried when I watched that movie. I was a small child of about 8 or 9 year old, because he and his wife were forced to virtually drown themselves into Godavari by people of their own caste, because they opened the gates of bhakti to all, irrespective of their caste. So that is a great characteristic feature of Vaishnava Bhakti. I totally agree with you. But there is a problem here, that they did make bhakti available to all people, irrespective of their social status. They still clung to the scriptures.
Mm.
In the case of Kabir and others, they rejected the scriptures also, whether it is Quran or Quran. So that is the difference. So in other words, they rejected caste system both in practice as well as in theory. They rejected the ideological basis of the caste system, which the Vaishnava saints could not do. I don't know whether you agree with me or not.
I do. Thank you very Thank you.
Yeah, thank
We'll take one last question. Tanpreet, if you can unmute.
Yeah. One last, so I can have two last.
Okay, you can have two last questions.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor, for this lecture. My first question is, in a layman, right, in the common public, there's this widely held belief that at a point of time, somewhere back in history, everyone who lives in India was Hindu at a point of time. Now, you spoke about the fluidity of religion, but how do you take this question that, how I don't know how true it is, or what are the layers to this, especially when we talk in terms of tribals and Dalits also, not just in terms of upper caste people. Should I put both the questions together, or
you. No, I let me answer this question. Then you can ask your second question. I mean, I think I did touch upon this question. I did tell you that. I mean, firstly, I don't agree that everyone was a Hindu before the Muslims came. And secondly, when I say that Muslims came, very few of them came actually. Most of the Indian Muslims are very much Indian. In fact, those who came from outside, I mean, if you look at their number, they would not even be 2% or 3% of the total Muslim population of the Indian subcontinent. I mean, you see, if you include Pakistan and Bangladesh, then the total Muslim population of Indian subcontinent would make it the largest Muslim area in the world. Of about, let us say, about 50 crore people. So it would be absolutely wrong to assume that they came from outside. In fact, whole of East Bengal, indigenous,
Correct.
virtually all of them, they are indigenous who did not even realize for a very long time that they were undergoing a process of gradual acculturation into Islam. It is only in the 18th century that the British observers started noticing a sort of Bengali Muslim peasantry. And in their rituals, in their religious life also, they followed very few Muslim practices. It is only in the 19th century that the Muslim reformers started, insisting that they should behave like Muslims. And same happened to most of the Muslim population of Punjab, where they were gradually Islamized. So what we have is, I mean, when you get in the books, in the conventional textbooks, when you come across instances of some person being converted to Islam forcibly or otherwise, such examples are very few. And you get influenced because you come across so many of them in the books. But only such cases are only those which have been recorded. Most cases are are cases of gradual process of Islamization, not sudden conversion. It's not that a man was Hindu till this evening and next morning he became a Muslim because of some forced conversion. Such cases are very few. So, secondly, I do not agree with this view that all the people of India were Hindu at the time of Turkish conquest. Just as people became Muslims in medieval times, people also became Hindus. And who played this important role in making people Hindu? Tribal and peasants and artisans Hindu, the Bhakti movement. Just as Sufis were doing this job in East Bengal and in West Punjab, Bhakti missionaries were doing this job without using the word Hindu. Tulsidas nowhere uses the word Hindu in his entire Ramcharitmanas. But what was happening? By coming into the framework of Bhakti movement, large number of peasants and artisans in the long run became fit for being called Hindu. So medieval period was a great period of both Hinduization as well as Islamization. And Sikhism anyway is a medieval religion. You know it very well. So in many areas where the Sufis could not reach, you see, where Brahmins could not reach, the Sufis reached. Had Brahmins gone to West Bengal, East Bengal, maybe the people would have become Hindu. Some of Chaitanya's followers did go there. So you do have some Hindu population there. But Tripura, for instance, there were, East Bengal became the area where the Brahmins refused to go. So who went there? The Sufis coming from Central Asia, passing through whole length of northern India, and then ultimately establishing themselves in East Bengal and asking people to take to agriculture and to give up their tribal life, dry up the marshy lands, and start cultivating the lands. So Islam became the religion of plow in Bengal, whereas in Makkah and Medina, it was the religion of urban people. In Bengal, Islam became the religion of the peasants. Are you getting this point?
Yes. I think it's very similar to look how Metis became Hindus just 200-300 years ago, right?
Yeah. And many Metis also became Muslims. You know, Pangal Muslims, Pangal, they are called Manipur Pangal.
Okay. I didn't know.
So Metis are not just Hindus. There are many Metis who are Muslims also.
Interesting.
So, how people become followers of one religion or the other is a very complex historical phenomenon which is linked to wider historical, socio-economic and political processes. And it is not something that happens suddenly. It is a long drawn process. That happened in the case of Christians also. People of Western Europe did not become Christian in one day. It took them the whole early medieval period after the decline of the Roman Empire in the 5th century. Northern Europe became Christian much later. And the battle continued in the 16th century when the Reformation came. Both the Protestants and Catholics were fighting with each other to make people true Christians.
Interesting.
So can we take one more question?
Second question. Yeah.
I'll just quickly say. So, what is in Indian context really the difference between sects and religion? Like in India, we call weaker Vaishnavism or Shaivism or Vishnoi as sect. But in Western world, Protestants are considered a religion and not a sect. So how could we were not able to divide further into sect? Even in Islam, right?
Yeah, you have raised a very important question. I'm very happy that you have done so because, and once I think you have understood what I said just now, you would also understand this. You see, you cannot have a sect without a religion. First, there is a religion, and then that religion is, is made of different sects. But so Christianity developed in the West, and it was broken into two: the Roman Catholic Christianity with Pope as their religious head, and the Eastern Christianity, which is also called Greek Orthodox Church, which covered Russia and Greece and some other regions. But in the West, mostly it was Roman Catholic Christianity. Then when Luther broke away from the church, then it was said that, that there was a split and various Protestant sects came up. But they all believed in Bible and they were part of one single Christianity. They were sects or sects, then there are cults also. Now, what in India's case, actually, it is wrong to use the word sect, because we are then assuming that there was one single religion of which there were various sects. This impression was created by British, that in the 19th century, one British scholar, Wilson, wrote a book, Hindu Religious Sects. So he said Kabir Panthis, Dadu Panthis, Sikhs, Vishnois are all sects of Hinduism. But the fact is that Hinduism itself was a construct of the British. They, all religions of India, they brought together and called it single religion, made it a world religion in the 19th century through this exercise, and then called these various independent religions as sects. Whereas in medieval times and in ancient times, each one of them had regarded itself as a separate, discrete religion, although they all were related. Just as, let me tell you, just as Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are interrelated, they are separate religions, but they are interrelated. There are many links among them. In the same way, Shaktas, Shaivas, Vaishnavas were looked upon as separate religions with their followers, but in dialogue with each other, related to each other. That is why we call them Indic religions. In that sense, Islam is not an Indic religion, but Sikhism is. So, but Islam, Judaism, Christianity are part of the same Semitic system, where all prophets of Jews are also the prophets of the Christians, and all prophets of the Christians are the prophets of Islam also. Jesus Christ occupies a very high place in Quran. All Jewish prophets occupy a very high place in Quran, including Abraham, Moses. The only thing is that the Jews do not accept Jesus Christ and the Christians do not accept Muhammad. So, but in that sense, Islam is more forward-looking and more broad-minded because they accept all the prophets of the Jews and the Christians. In the same way, we Hindus, Shaktas and Shaivas and Vaishnavas are interrelated. If you look at Tulsidas' Ramcharitmanas, for instance, it's a wonderful work of assimilation of different Indic religious traditions, where Lord Shiva himself is narrating the story of Rama to his consort Parvati, and Parvati is asking him, "Who is this Ram? Tell me something about him." So he then says, "Okay, I'll tell the whole story to you." So the entire story of Ram is being narrated by Lord Shiva. So this is a wonderful way of a compromise between Shaivism and Vaishnavism. And later on, obviously, Lord Rama, returns the gift by worshipping Lord Shiva when he has to cross the ocean to enter Lanka.
Thank you so much.
So I think one has to see these links, and I think, so your question is good because today what are considered sects of Hinduism could have had independent existence, though they were interrelated to each other. Later on in the 19th century, all of them came together to become what we call Hinduism. In the case of Christianity, religion was already there, then it broke into sects. So the history of processes is in reverse. The history is in reverse.
It's like in Sikhism, you have Nirankaris and the Khalsas, right? They could have
These
been
all
separate
happened
people.
later, actually.
Okay.
All these, you see, in Sikhism, from the very beginning, there were schisms in Sikhism from the very beginning. But in course of time, the faction, the group which broke away ultimately became marginalized and gradually either became defunct or became insignificant. Otherwise, right after Guru Nanak, there were tendencies to, for instance, after Guru Nanak, I think his son, claimed his status, but it was not accepted because Guru Nanak had clearly pointed out that his disciple, Guru Angad, would become his successor. So again, it happened after the fourth Guru, fifth Guru. It happened many times. You have in Dehradun, for instance, in my hometown, in Dehradun, you have an establishment of Guru Ram Rai. Guru Ram Rai was the son of Guru Har Rai. So he was the elder son. First, he was made the successor, but later on, he was rejected. His claim was rejected. So what did he do? He established his own sect, the Udasis. But then gradually, he ceased to be a part of official Sikhism. His sect became absolutely independent of Sikhism. So it happens, when religion, in the case of Hinduism, sects coming together and then together being called Hinduism is one thing. In the case of other religions, it is the other way around. In the case of Islam, you have Shias and Sunnis. Shias themselves are divided into many subsects. In India, for instance, we have Isna Asaris, who are 12ers, the majority of them. They are the majority Shia sect. But below them, they are Ismailis. The Ismailis themselves are divided into various groups, Khojas, Bohras, Satpanthis, and whatnot. So, same is true of Christians.
Got it.
Thank you so much, Professor Bahuguna. And there are more questions, but we'll keep that for the next lecture.
Sure.
Today's lecture was on Bhakti. I think next we'll continue with the Sufi tradition, and we'll dig deeper into the whole idea of religion. And so thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for taking out time, and thank you so much everybody for joining in.
Right.
We'll meet again, hopefully next week or next to next week. I'll discuss the date with Professor Bahuguna and mention it in the group maybe in 2 days. Thank you so much, and I'll just end the
I
recording.
really like the discussion. There was good discussion.